Marvel and DC are doing their first crossover in over 20 years, and it's being written by Grant Morrison with art by Dan Mora. And on the Marvel side, you have Greg Capullo and Zeb Wells. But why am I not excited? Because of all the characters in both companies, they thought the best pairing that they could come up with was Batman and Deadpool. In a business sense, tracks. But I can't help but be disappointed. Hey Internet, I'm Chris, and this is the place on the internet where I talk about comics, movies, games, and things I'm generally passionate about. If you want to hear more about Batman or Deadpool, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. So when Marvel and DC at Comics Pro this year announced that they were working on a crossover after reprinting their Amalgam and Marvel vs. DC crossovers in omnibus format just a couple months ago, I was like, yes, finally something fun that can get people in the comic shop. It seems like between the Ultimates, the Absolute DC universe, both companies are figuring out ways to get readers interested and also bring in people they may have lost over the years. But when they finally announced what that first crossover would be, it was exciting in some regard because you're like, oh, Grant Morrison, Dan Mora, like this is it. This is it. But then it's Batman and Deadpool. The Batman part makes sense. The Deadpool one, not so much. Deadpool is one of those characters that obviously from a licensing standpoint is probably Marvel's biggest character alongside like Spider-Man and some others. Obviously had $1 billion movie last year, but I do feel like on the comic space that Marvel overestimates how much people care, the comic buying audience cares about Deadpool, and also maybe some of the general audience that may be interested in comic books. Maybe Deadpool is one of those characters that actually is better in a movie or a video game or on a t-shirt than he actually is in the comic books. But that's just my reaction. And also, it doesn't help that on the Marvel side of this crossover, you have Zeb Wells writing it. Zeb Wells wrote Deadpool and Wolverine, but also they just happen to come off what is one of the most hated runs in comics, which is his Amazing Spider-Man run. I have not read it, but I hear about that run more than I do actual ones I'm reading. So yes, I'm excited about seeing Grant Morrison and Dan Mora collaborating. After years, they were working together on Klaus, so to see them at DC, and then obviously like Grant Morrison on Big Two books, like that's gonna get anyone excited that reads comic books. But again, it's just like, hey, like this crossover, like couldn't have been like Batman and Daredevil, Batman and Moon Knight, you know what I mean? Something we're gonna get more, and there's some backup stories that are gonna be in these one shots. You have the DC side of the one shot, which is gonna be Grant Morrison and Dan Mora. Then you're gonna have the Marvel one, which is Zeb Wells and Greg Capullo. So like exciting artists, and there's going to be backup stories, and sure, they're going to tease out what's coming in 2026, which is probably going to be a lot bigger, and hopefully a lot more interesting in terms of the pairings of the characters. Like I'm hoping for maybe a Nightwing and Spider-Man one and all those kind of things. It happens kind of once every generation of readers. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions as to why he comments. The timing has to be right in that you don't want to do these too often. You want them to feel special. It is sort of finding that right moment for both companies to come together because it is complex. There's a lot more coordination, collaboration, approvals that have to be done. And obviously from the business side, you're sharing revenue, but it's going to be a big deal. So you want the story creatively to warrant the hype of it all. I don't know if Batman and Deadpool does that. The story kicking off September 17th tells how Wade Wilson is hired for a job in Gotham City that puts him in the crosshairs of the world's greatest detective. Accompanying the main one-shot will be a lineup of backup adventures that features exciting Marvel and DC characters matchups, according to an official description. However, details on what that entails, including the creative teams, will be shared at a later date. I hope there are some big teams, and obviously things like Nightwing and Spider-Man. I was hoping for Batman, Daredevil, Batman, Moon Knight, which you probably aren't going to get because of the Deadpool crossover. But if we know anything about DC, they'll print 1,000 Batman comics before that company dies. So
I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die.
So maybe we get a second Batman crossover with some other characters, and maybe this is just, again, the kickoff, and this is something fun to get people into the shop. And at a later date, we get something more story-focused and maybe some more Grant Morrison comics that are not Deadpool ones. After writing Amazing Spider-Man for 60 issues, I told Marvel I needed a break. Yes, you did, Zeb. Wells tells EW in a statement via email, Marvel told me I could do that, or I could write a comic starring Deadpool and Batman with the best Batman artists of our generation. I no longer needed a break. In Batman, we found someone who has even less time for Deadpool's antics than Wolverine, but a citywide threat from the Joker makes strange bedfellows, literally, if Deadpool had his way. It's been a blast letting Deadpool loose in Gotham City and watching what happens. Actually, that's a pretty cool concept, Deadpool and Joker. That should have maybe been the point of the whole crossover. But we'll see. Again, I am skeptical because listen. I am maybe in my own bubble when it comes to Deadpool, where I have a little bit of Deadpool fatigue. I even posted a reel on Instagram, sort of like making fun of the announcement, and people were just in the comments like, "Why do you hate fun?" So I guess maybe I'm alone in this, but just let me know. Am I crazy for not being excited for Deadpool and Batman? Outside of the fact that you got some great Dan Mora and Greg Capullo art, and then also Grant Morrison, I am actually excited to see what Zeb Wells does outside of Amazing Spider-Man, because it seems like his name is forever associated with that book, even if you've never read it. Like, I've never read that run, and it seems like everywhere I go, I see, hey, this was, all time bad. But it seems like every time someone takes over Amazing Spider-Man, it is the worst Amazing Spider-Man run ever. So it just seems like that character in that particular book is cursed. DC brings together comparable creative heavyweights to tackle their own respective one-shot. Batman Deadpool, launching later this November, hails from writer Grant Morrison, whose comics, including All-Star Superman and Batman and Son, now serve as inspiration for the James Gunn and Peter Safran-led DC movieverse. And artist Dan Mora, who, similar to Capullo, has an immense list of credits to his name. Details on DC stories and the company backup adventures will be announced at a later date. I don't do many comics these days, but there is no way I could turn down the chance to work with Dan Mora again, one of my all-time favorite artistic collaborators, and definitely no way I could turn down Batman and Deadpool. Morrison says in a statement, "Expect fourth wall busting mayhem, owls, blood, blades, and at least one giant typewriter." So maybe we're getting a spiritual successor to their Animal Man run, which had a lot of fourth wall breaking and was groundbreaking. So maybe this is the greatest crossover ever written, and Grant Morrison will deliver a Deadpool story that will make me eat my own words and be like, why was I anti-fun? The other piece of the news is that Deadpool Batman, or Batman Deadpool, is not the end of the Marvel and DC crossovers. Another set of one-shots will arrive sometime in 2026, though both sides remain quiet in terms of which characters will team up next and which creators will be involved to create those adventures. Anyone that's working in comics today grew up with a Marvel DC crossover at some moment in their reading timeline history. Lee cryptically comments, "I think once you become a creator, you want to work on the biggest characters for both companies. But then to be able to do something that only happens every 15 to 20 years, it is something you don't want to pass up. So I think fans are going to see a lot of interesting projects from their favorite creators." That's all I can say. Well, Deadpool, Batman, Deadpool from Zeb Wells, Greg Capullo, Grant Morrison, and Dan Mora is definitely interesting. Will it be good? We'll find out. If you've watched the channel, I'm always advocating for these companies doing anything they can to get more people involved in comics, whether it be reading it, interacting with the characters outside of the film and sort of like wider media landscape, because it is important if they want these characters to succeed in their film, TV, and gaming ambitions. These bigger companies really need to invest in the foundation of these characters, which are the comics. And I love comics. It's why all of this exists. So I know it may seem hypocritical of me to be like, oh, Batman, Deadpool, like, why? It's just sometimes the fan in you takes over, and I was expecting something a little bit different. But I do completely get why this happens. Batman literally pays the bills at DC, keeps the lights on. Deadpool, in terms of comics, I don't think that's the case, but from a licensing standpoint, you can't go into a Target anywhere without Deadpool. Deadpool has even crossed over with All Might in his manga. So it's insane. It's a hugely popular character around the world. But Marvel and DC do have to do a really good job of figuring out how to get this book in areas outside the comic shops to hopefully bring in new readers. And here's hoping that the crossovers in 2026 are a lot more interesting than Batman and Deadpool. What do you guys think? Are you excited about Batman and Deadpool? Let me know. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace.